moment my husband said her name, the Christmas lights seemed to dim. We were standing in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and roasting turkey already wrapped around the house like a promise of peace. Snow tapped gently against the windows, and the radio hummed an old carol I'd loved since childhood. I was basting the turkey when he cleared his throat, the way he always did, before saying something he knew would land wrong. By the way, he said casually, not looking at me, Linda is coming to Christmas dinner. I paused mid-motion. Linda, his ex-wife. I didn't turn around right away. I focused on my breathing, on the steady rhythm of the house I'd worked so hard to make feel like a home. After 40 years of marriage, you learn that silence can be a shield. Finally, I faced him. Your ex is coming here, I asked. He shrugged, like he was telling me we'd run out of milk. She's alone this year. Her kids are with their in-laws. It felt wrong to let her spend Christmas by herself. It felt wrong. I studied his face, the familiar lines, the confident calm of a man who had never once been asked to make himself uncomfortable for the sake of harmony. I waited for him to say more, to ask how I felt, to notice the way my hand trembled slightly against the counter. He didn't. Something settled in my chest then. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, clearer. Of course, I said, and to my own surprise, I smiled. The more, the merrier. His shoulders relaxed immediately. Relief flickered across his face, followed by something else, gratitude maybe, or arrogance. After all these years, I'd learned how easy it was for him to confuse the two. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. I knew you'd understand, he said. Understand. I'd spent a lifetime understanding his moods, his silences, his unspoken expectations. I understood how often I'd been the one to bend so things wouldn't break. That evening, as I set the table with the good china, the one we only used on holidays, I thought about the last time I'd seen Linda. She'd stood a little too close to my husband, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. I remembered how he'd avoided my eyes afterward. I remembered more than he realized. While the house slept, I sat at the small desk in the guest room and made a phone call of my own. My voice was calm, polite, purposeful. Yes, I said softly into the receiver. Christmas dinner, I think it's time. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge, readiness. As I turned off the light and climbed into bed beside my husband, already snoring peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how funny life can be. Sometimes, when people invite the past back into their homes, they forget one thing. The past never comes alone. And Christmas was only 3 days away. I slept better than I expected that night, and when morning came, I understood why. A decision had already been made inside me. The house woke slowly, wrapped in the soft sounds of Christmas preparation. My husband moved about cheerfully, humming to himself as if he'd done something noble instead of careless. He poured coffee, flipped through the paper, and spoke with the easy confidence of a man who had never had his comfort challenged. "Linda called," he said casually. "She's bringing her cranberry tart. You always liked that one." I took a sip of my coffee and let the bitterness settle. I did remember the tart. I remembered many things from those years, how her name came up too often, how comparisons were slipped into conversations like jokes that weren't quite jokes. "That's fine," I said. "Everyone should bring something." He smiled, satisfied. To him, the matter was settled. Later, I drove into town for groceries. The streets were crowded with holiday shoppers, bundled children tugging at mittens, couples arguing softly over ornaments, life going on, unaware that my own quiet reckoning was already underway. In the bakery line, my phone buzzed. "Are we still on for Christmas?" I stepped aside near the window, the smell of sugar and warm bread filling the air. "Yes," I typed. "Dinner is at 6. I'll send the address again." There was a long pause before the reply came. "Thank you. I didn't expect this, but I think it's time." I slid my phone back into my purse. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Back home, I wrapped gifts alone while my husband napped in his chair. I took my time, smoothing paper, tying ribbons just right. Some presents were small and thoughtful. Others were symbolic gestures of tradition, obligation, habit, and one invitation was neither kind nor cruel. It was necessary. As I worked, memories surfaced the way they do when your hands are busy. The early years of marriage, the way my husband would say, "Linda never worried about things like that," or "she used to do it differently." I'd smiled then, told myself I was being sensitive, that love meant adapting. You can adapt yourself right out of your own life if you're not careful. By evening, the house glowed with lights. I polished the silverware until my reflection stared back at me, older, yes, but no longer uncertain. My daughter called to check in. "Are you okay hosting?" she asked carefully. "I'm more than okay," I said. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Christmas Eve arrived under a blanket of snow. My husband stood beside me at the window, arm around my shoulders. "You're taking this surprisingly well," he said. "Most women would have made a scene." I smiled gently. "Most women," I said, "wouldn't need to," he laughed, missing the weight of it entirely. That night, when I set the place cards, I placed one carefully between his seat and Linda's. It wasn't his name written there. And once that chair was filled, the truth would have nowhere left to hide. The morning of Christmas Day arrived quietly, almost reverently, as if the house itself knew what was coming. I woke before dawn, the way I always did on holidays, and stood alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea warming my hands. Outside, the world was wrapped in white, the snow smoothing over sharp edges, pretending everything was clean and new. I'd spent much of my life doing the same. My husband came in a little later, cheerful and unaware, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd slept well. "Very," I said truthfully. As the day unfolded, I moved through my preparations with care. Not nervous care intentional care. The table was set just right, candles trimmed, place settings balanced, nothing out of place. Control, I'd learned, doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. "We'll be there on time," the message read. I stared at it for a moment, then replied, "Drive safe." My husband noticed the smile that crossed my face. "Who's that?" he asked. "An old acquaintance," I said lightly. He nodded, already distracted, convinced there was nothing left to discover about me. By late afternoon, the house was full of warmth and sound. The oven hummed. Music played softly in the background. Outside, headlights cut through the dusk as guests began to arrive. Linda came first. She looked much the same, well-dressed, confident, wearing a smile that knew its way around my home. She hugged my husband a second longer than necessary and handed me her tart like a peace offering. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "It means a lot." "You're welcome," I replied, meeting her eyes. "Christmas is about inclusion." My husband beamed, pleased with himself. More guests followed. Laughter rose. Glasses clinked. Everything appeared normal, almost festive. Almost. Then, just before 6, the doorbell rang again. I'll get it, I said, already moving toward the door. My husband looked up from the living room, mildly surprised. "We're all here, aren't we?" "Almost," I replied. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of snow and pine. Standing on the porch was a man in a dark coat, his shoulders dusted white, his expression calm but guarded. He held a small gift in one hand, like someone unsure whether they were welcome, but determined to step forward anyway. "Thank you for coming," I said softly. He nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." Behind me, the house buzzed with conversation until my husband appeared in the doorway. The color drained from his face. "Tom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Linda turned at the sound of that name. Her smile faltered, then vanished entirely. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the music seemed too loud, suddenly out of place. "I didn't realize," Linda began, then stopped. I stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Please come in. Dinner is almost ready." Tom hesitated, then crossed the threshold. Snow melted from his shoes onto the rug, little dark spots marking his presence, like punctuation in a sentence no one wanted to finish. "Who is this?" my husband asked sharply, though he already knew. "A guest," I said calmly, "just like Linda." Tom cleared his throat. "I'm Linda's fiancé." The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Linda's eyes darted to my husband, then to me. "You invited him?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes," I said. "It felt only fair." My husband laughed once short, hollow. "This is ridiculous. You should have told me." I tilted my head. "You didn't ask." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Someone in the living room shifted awkwardly. A fork clinked against a plate. Tom spoke again, his voice steady. "I didn't know you'd be here either," he said to my husband, "but I'm glad I am." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her purse down. Dinner was announced moments later, the timing almost cruel. We took our seats, the place cards guiding us like a script no one had rehearsed for. Linda sat to my husband's right. Tom took the chair between them. As we passed dishes and made small talk, I watched my husband struggle to keep his composure. He laughed too loudly, drank too quickly, avoided Tom's eyes at all costs. Linda barely touched her food. Finally, Tom set his fork down. "There's something I should probably say," he began. My husband's face went pale. Linda reached for Tom's arm. "Not now," she whispered. Tom gently moved her hand away. "Actually," he said, looking directly at my husband, "now seems perfect." I folded my napkin neatly on my lap, my heart steady. Some truths don't belong to later. And Christmas dinner was about to serve more than turkey. The room felt smaller the moment Tom spoke, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. "I didn't plan to say this tonight," he continued, his voice calm but deliberate. "But seeing everyone together, it feels dishonest not to." My husband shifted in his chair, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. "If this is about old history," he said, "Christmas dinner isn't the place." Tom met his eyes. "That's exactly why it is." Linda stared at her plate, her fork frozen midair. I noticed the way her shoulders tightened, how she folded inward like someone bracing for a cold wind. Tom took a breath. When Linda and I got engaged, we agreed there would be no secrets. None. Especially not about unfinished business. My husband's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you think you're implying." "You used to meet her," Tom said, gently but firmly, "after your divorce, long after you remarried." The air left the room. I heard a sharp inhale from someone down the table. My husband stared at Tom as if he'd been struck. "That's not true," he said quickly. Too quickly. Tom didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I wasn't sure at first either, but I found the messages, the lunches, the phone calls you didn't think anyone would notice." Linda finally looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "I told you I ended it," she whispered to my husband. "I told you it couldn't continue." My husband turned to her, desperate. "You said you wouldn't say anything." And there it was. The confession slipped out before he could catch it, fragile and unmistakable. No one spoke. Even the candles seemed to flicker more cautiously. I set my fork down and folded my hands in my lap. I wasn't shaking. I'd had weeks, years, really, to prepare for this moment, even if I hadn't known its exact shape. Tom stood slowly. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here because I love Linda, and I won't build a future on someone else's silence." Linda began to cry then, quietly, like someone mourning something that should have been laid to rest long ago. My husband looked at me at last, truly looked at me. His face held confusion, anger, and something close to fear. "You planned this," he said. I nodded once. "I allowed the truth to arrive," I corrected. "There's a difference." He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "So what now?" he demanded. "You humiliate me in front of everyone." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "No, you did that yourself. I simply stopped protecting you from it." Around the table, guests sat frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. I offered a small, reassuring smile. "Please," I said, "finish your dinner. No one needs to rush." My husband stared at me as if he were seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was, because the woman sitting across from him was no longer the one who smoothed over his mistakes, who swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. She was someone else now. And this Christmas, peace would come from truth or not at all. For a long moment, no one moved. The clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking time in a room where everything had already changed. My husband remained standing, hands braced on the back of his chair, as if the furniture were the only thing keeping him upright. Linda was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, almost brittle. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said, staring at the tablecloth. "It started as conversations, just catching up." "Catching up," Tom repeated softly, not unkindly. "For 2 years." My husband rounded on him. "You went through her phone." "Yes," Tom said. "After she woke up crying in the middle of the night and wouldn't tell me why." That quiet admission landed harder than any accusation. I watched my husband's face shift, anger giving way to something else. Not guilt, not remorse. Panic. The kind that comes when a man realizes the story he's been telling himself no longer holds. "You didn't have to bring this here," he said to me, his voice lower now. "You could have talked to me privately." I nodded. "I tried," I said, "for years. You were always too busy explaining why I was wrong to listen to what I was feeling." Silence followed, the kind that doesn't invite interruption. Tom cleared his throat. "Linda and I have decided to postpone the wedding." Linda flinched, then nodded slowly. "I need to figure out who I am without unfinished chapters," she said, "without borrowing comfort from the past." My husband sank back into his chair, suddenly smaller. "So that's it?" he asked. "Everyone just turns on me." I looked at him with a sadness that surprised even me. "No one turned on you," I said. "They simply stopped turning away." Around the table, guests quietly began to gather plates, offering gentle excuses to step into the kitchen, to give us space. No one rushed out. No one dramatized it. Life has a way of continuing, even when illusions collapse. Later, when the house had thinned and the snow outside had deepened, my husband found me alone in the den. The tree lights cast soft reflections on the windows, framing us in a glow that felt almost undeserved. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice strained. I folded my hands together. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I replied. "Love isn't proven by what you don't mean to do. It's proven by what you choose to stop doing when you know it hurts." He sat across from me, eyes wet. "What do you want now?" I took a long breath. This was the question he'd never asked before, and it mattered that he asked it now. "I want honesty," I said, "even if it costs us comfort, especially then." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of that truth was settling onto his shoulders for the first time. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet, relentless, honest. And for the first time that day, I felt something close to peace. But peace, I knew, was only the beginning. Some choices still had to be made. The house felt strangely hollow once the guests were gone. Plates were stacked neatly in the sink, candles burned low, and the Christmas tree blinked on and off like it was trying to pretend nothing had happened. My husband moved through the rooms without purpose, straightening things that didn't need straightening, avoiding my eyes. I stayed in my chair, listening to the quiet. Finally, he stopped in front of me. "I don't know how we fix this," he said. I looked up at him, really looked. The man I'd built a life with stood there stripped of confidence, of excuses. Age had softened him, but it had also made his habits more permanent. "Fixing comes after honesty," I said. "Right now, we're still naming the damage." He sat down slowly. I thought it didn't matter anymore. It was in the past. "The past doesn't stay past when you keep visiting it," I replied. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I never touched her after we divorced," he said quickly. "If that's what you're thinking." I believed him. Strangely, that wasn't the hardest part. "It wasn't your body that betrayed me," I said. "It was your loyalty." He flinched. We talked long into the night, not arguing, not forgiving, just talking. He admitted how familiar Linda had felt, how easy it was to slip back into old patterns without consequences. I told him how lonely it is to share a life with someone who keeps a door open elsewhere. There were tears, mostly his. Mine had been spent quietly over many years. At one point, he asked, "Do you still love me?" I considered the question carefully. Love is a complicated thing after decades. "I care for you," I said honestly, "but love needs safety. And right now, I don't feel safe." He nodded, accepting that answer like a verdict. When dawn crept in, pale and forgiving, I stood and gathered the empty mugs from the table. My body felt tired, but my mind was clear. "I'm going to my sister's for a while," I said. "I need space to think without protecting your feelings." He didn't argue. That might have hurt more if he had. As I packed a small bag, he stood in the doorway. "What if I change?" he asked quietly. I zipped the bag and met his eyes. "Change isn't something you promise," I said. "It's something you live long enough for others to believe." I left just after sunrise, the snow crunching under my boots, the house behind me dark and still. I didn't know what would happen to my marriage, but for the first time, I knew exactly what would happen to me. I would no longer disappear to keep someone else comfortable. And that certainty carried me all the way down the road. My sister's house smelled like fresh coffee and lavender, the kind of scent that makes you feel welcome without asking questions. She didn't pry. She never did. She simply hugged me long and tight, the way women do when they already understand more than words could explain. I slept in her guest room that first night, and dreamed of nothing at all, which felt like a gift. The days that followed were quiet. I took long walks in the cold air, letting my thoughts stretch and settle. I replayed moments from my marriage, not with anger, but with clarity. I saw where I had bent too often, where silence had slowly replaced trust. My husband called on the third day. "I'm not calling to rush you," he said quickly. I want you to know I've cut off contact. Completely." I closed my eyes. "That's a start," I said. "But it doesn't undo years of choosing familiarity over respect." "I know," he replied. "I'm finally listening. Listening." The word lingered with me after we hung up. A week passed, then another. Linda called once, apologizing, sounding smaller than I'd ever heard her. I thanked her for the honesty and wished her well. Holding onto bitterness felt pointless now. Tom sent a short message too. "Thank you for giving the truth room to breathe," it read. I smiled at that. On the 12th day, my husband asked if we could meet for coffee. "Neutral ground," he said. I agreed. He looked different, quieter. He didn't reach for my hand across the table. He didn't interrupt when I spoke. He told me he'd started therapy, not to save our marriage, he said, but to understand why he'd risk it. "I don't expect forgiveness," he told me. "I'm prepared to earn trust or accept that I might not." I believed him. Or rather, I believed his effort. That afternoon, as I drove back to my sister's house, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief, not hope, permission. Permission to choose myself without guilt. I wasn't sure what the future held, whether it meant reconciliation or a gentle goodbye after decades together. But I knew one thing with certainty: love that survives truth is the only kind worth keeping. And for the first time in my life, I was willing to let truth decide. There was still one conversation left to have, and when it came, it would change everything, one way or another. The last conversation happened on an ordinary afternoon, which felt fitting. No holiday, no audience, no drama waiting in the next room. My husband and I sat across from each other at the small kitchen table in my sister's house, sunlight spilling through the window like a quiet witness. He looked older to me then, not in years, but in awareness. Awareness has a way of aging people quickly. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about who I was and who I convinced myself I was." I nodded, giving him the space he denied me for so long. "I built my life around being needed," he continued. "And when that faded, I looked backward instead of inward. That was my failure." It was the first time he hadn't softened the truth. I rested my hands on the table. "I spent years mistaking patience for loyalty," I said. "I thought staying quiet made me strong. But strength isn't endurance. It's honesty with yourself, most of all." He swallowed. "Do you think there's still something left for us?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about our children, our shared history, the comfort of routine. I also thought about the woman I had become in the past weeks, awake, steady, no longer afraid of being inconvenient. "Yes," I said finally, "there's something left, but it won't look like before. We agreed on boundaries, on counseling, on rebuilding slowly without guarantees. I didn't promise permanence. I promised presence, only as long as respect remained intact. When I returned home days later, the house felt different. Not healed, not whole, but honest. My husband moved carefully now, listening more than speaking, and I moved freely, no longer shrinking myself to fit someone else's comfort. Some people think Christmas miracles are loud and sudden, but the real ones are quiet. They happen when a woman finally stops swallowing the truth and lets it speak calmly, firmly, without apology. And that was the greatest gift I ever gave myself. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.